Super. Okay, I think we're good to go. Good to go. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for making some time on a beautiful summer morning. This is great to see. For today, basically, I think we have three things that we're putting forward. So first, wouldn't mind having just a bit of an opening discussion on how reopening is going. We're a week in, or just about a week into the reopening and moving into stage 2. So I'd really like to hear from the group on how things are going. And certainly, I think Susan, Abba, I know that you guys are right into this as well. I would have asked Tim as well, but I'll get his input. So maybe we can start with that discussion. Then we have a few items that are responding back to some of the issues that were raised in the previous meeting. So just getting some updates from staff, and then just getting your feedback and input on that as well. And then the third, I would like to have a bit of a discussion with the group, not only on other agenda items that we can explore a bit, but maybe even on a bit of a deeper level, just on process and how the group would like to proceed about how we can put those items and agenda issues forward. So I'll talk a little bit more about that one once we get there. So maybe we'll kick things off. Ian, if you're okay to maybe kick us off just on the reopening status updates, if you just let us know what you're hearing from businesses, and then we can get some input from the group as well.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. Wanted to start off today just by expressing a thank you for the members of the team that are business owners or managers. It's extremely busy right now as people are reopening. And as I've been doing a lot of outreach to businesses throughout the community, I know how important it is for you to be focusing on your businesses rather than these discussions that don't necessarily contribute to your bottom line. So thank you for all the people on the call that go above and beyond what their day-to-day operations are. Since our last call, I've been making a concerted effort to reach out to more businesses just to see how their forecasting is looking, how the reopening process is going, and getting a lot of that feedback. My original intent was to do some subgroups, but realizing that, again, people don't have time necessarily for small business owners to hop on group calls in the evenings and at 10 o'clock in the morning to chit chat about what's going on. I've been doing more one-on-one connections. This week, I've been discussing with a lot of businesses in the personal service sectors, just talking about how the reopening is going for them and what's been missing. One of the things that's been coming up is that in the personal service sector, a lot of their employees are contract employees. So you might have a hair salon that doesn't necessarily have 10 employees, but they rent out chairs or something like that. So they're sort of falling through the cracks with respect to some of the supports. So it's good intel for us to know as we start building out some potential relief programs through the city to make sure that we're aligning that with the businesses that are falling through the cracks still. The general feeling from most businesses, obviously, is that they wish they had more notice and more direction as we reopen. I've been reminding a lot of people that this is our first time through something like this. And whether we go through this again or any other sort of breakdowns, I like to call them, at least we'll be more prepared on how the activity goes. So there's been a lot of patience with that, which is good. There's a lot of increasing discussion around mental health and ensuring that we're focusing on helping businesses reopen that support mental health programs, whether it's personal training, yoga studios, any sort of those sessions. And it's also frustrating for those organizations because even if they can practice physical distancing, still not on the list for reopening. They're being frustrated there because their client base is reaching out saying that they want to start using their services. So working with them to get some of the educational pieces out there so that they can start aligning and they're ready to go right away. I had some great conversations with representatives from the real estate development, real estate leasing, management, as well as lending communities this week. Just talking about how things are likely going to change, have changed, and will continue to change for the next 12 months or beyond. With respect to risk adoption in lending markets, it looks like underwriting teams are probably going to lose a little bit of their flexibility when people are coming for loans. Obviously, that'll be dependent by the lender that you're working with, but it's important to bear in mind that if you used to have a pretty strong cash flow and you could get through some of the underwriting loops, that might not be available anymore or for a while. A lot of the lenders are seeing that they've processed small loan volumes in the last 3 months, equivalent to about 2.5 years worth of loan volume. So they've been extremely busy with that. We're starting to see a bit of a trend in some Airbnbs are moving back into long-term rentals in Kingston. So that's changing the marketplace a little bit. The market right now for multi-tenant res buildings is just insane. Multiple offers going out. Things are often or on and off the market pretty quickly. And I mean, this might be something that we consider looking at. This was brought up on my call yesterday, that as we have a varying workforce and employment levels, less people might be able to get mortgages, which means they might be looking at smaller dwellings. So we might see a rise in the demand for apartments or even the development of multi-tenant res. So something to think about as we look at strategies. One other thing that came up on the call was it was interesting post World War II and how that was the surgence of suburban areas, and it's something to look at, whether or not people are going to be demanding more space for where they're living. And on the call I had yesterday, there was 10 people on the call, and of those 10 people, 50% of them knew of somebody from either the US or larger markets, GTA, Montreal, Ottawa, that are moving to Kingston because now they can work remotely and they want more affordable housing with backyards, close proximity to lakes, stuff like that. So I would imagine we're going to start seeing this trend. As a person who sells Kingston myself, I've had many conversations with my friends in greater cities saying, yeah, get out of the rat race and come to Kingston. I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing right now, but we'll see how the trending goes. Another good thing for retail, hospitality, and food and beverage in Kingston, landowners and rental property owners are seeing trends that most of their students are holding on to their leases and they're planning on returning to Kingston. They probably just want to get away from their parents wherever they are. So whether they're doing their classes virtually or not, many of those leases are still holding strong for September. So hopefully if with nice weather, our patios can stay busy as long as possible, we can start generating some of that revenue. And then really the consensus is that we'll know in the next 6 to 9 months how these businesses have been performing as we roll into fall, and we'll really be able to get a good indication on where our business economy is going to be at that point. Landlords, from what I'm hearing, are cooperating at varying levels with their tenants, which is good. We haven't heard of any communication of looming evictions because of failure to pay rent. Everyone seems to be working together for the most part. Obviously, everything's not perfect. The other thing that was important that came out of one of my calls this week was that for some of the businesses that did close during our downturn, a lot of those businesses also were sort of on the rails for the last 12 months or so anyways. Not saying that these businesses didn't get hit hard through this, but it's really important as we start looking at the impact of COVID on Kingston and the business community to look at the full picture with respect to financial performance of the businesses, to see if maybe this was the last straw or if there was something that could have been prevented, and maybe as we look forward with our support programs, how we can help these businesses better. So that's sort of a quick snapshot of the conversations that I was having this week. Obviously, there's more information coming out daily. And I do think that my messaging, when people are talking about how they wish they had more notice on how to open successfully and what they should be doing, I think it's important that we bring the messaging together and try and provide it in one concise either location or message channel. And the other thing is reminding people that we're all going through this for the first time. So having patience with each other. There's stresses in a lot of our businesses. There's a lot of other stresses going on in the world right now. And I think we have to have patience with each other. And when we do see other ebbs and flows of this downturn coming, at least we'll be more prepared going forward. People now know how to put masks on for the again, and put face shields on, and they're getting comfortable doing that. So we'll be better coming out of this, I think. So that's my recap for everybody.
Thanks, Ian. That's really useful intel. Certainly confirms some of what I've heard. Certainly on the expected student market, and I know that's certainly top of mind for Moore and Chris over at KFLA Public Health about how we'll also respond to that from a public health piece. So that's definitely something to discuss. Interesting about, I know right now we're kind of in a like rapid response mode where we're very focused on the short term, but I think that longer term piece about how Kingston could actually become more attractive and we might get more of an influx. It was interesting to know if we've already have some pressures on our growth pressures, what we would see, years out. And certainly I've anecdotally had a number of people in in dense urban centers like Toronto say that this pandemic was the last straw for them, that they're looking to get out, and a place like Kingston will actually be more attractive. So it's really interesting. Something I think that we will want to explore in more detail for sure as the days go on. Can I just open up the floor just for other thoughts and about how things are going so far? I know we're just a week in, but it would be really valuable for me, and certainly I think for staff as well, to understand just first impressions about how the reopening is going, what's going well, what isn't going well, what challenges continue to be there. I'd open up the flow to everybody, but yeah, I'm definitely thinking of a couple of people, and for sure. So Abba, if you could jump in and just let us know what's your perspective.
Sure. So I just apologize. I'm just driving, so I hope I don't cut in and out and that you can hear me. But so I would say there are some positives. Like, it's been great that we've been able to reopen. Staff are happy to be back, and clients who are comfortable are happy to be there. I would say that, our feedback has been mainly positive. People are very patient. They understand that we're navigating kind of new structures and implementing things so that we can all make sure that we're safe. But with that too, I would say we have had a couple of challenges with respect to, for example, if I look at the staffing with childcare. So trying to figure out how can I help my staff, because many of them, their childcare maybe was associated with, and I see that we have a bullet point of that later on, so perhaps we'll discuss that. But some of them, for example, their childcare was associated with a school, and they're not going to be open until September. And so for me, this is kind of a peak period. So if we're kind of trying to get sales and we're trying to kind of recover a bit, I need to maximize my staff. So where does that leave me in terms of options? So I would like to be able to figure out how can I facilitate or help them with childcare. Can I hire somebody, so that I can maybe have some sort of person that is assigned to that person, so that we can have the staff that we need, and so that I can show that I'm supporting my staff. So I feel like part of the challenge for some people maybe, if this is not an option and they can't help their staff, would they then hire other people? And then what happens?
I think we just lost you. Oh. Go ahead.
Am I back? So that's part of the challenge. And then also like the consistency. So we are in the phase where we can't do face treatments, for example. But the challenge with that is that a lot of people are then going to people who may not be in a licensed place that already has structure. So they're trying to find alternative ways to get their brows done or to get lashes or other things like that in places that aren't regulated by Kingston Public Health, who don't have those standards that are already in place, And so now that it's been extended to the end of July, and that usually is kind of a big uptake of us again. So facials, lashes, tints at this time of year, then people are going to start looking at alternative structures. So I'm saying, if we can have a mask while somebody is wearing a lash and a person is wearing a shield, where are we then putting the risk? Like, what is the risk, and where are we putting that standard of saying that you can have, for example, Botox on your lips, but you can't have your brows waxed with a mask on? So I guess just like those nuances for a perspective where this is kind of, those are prime season things. So childcare, consistency with what gets done and what not, what isn't getting done and why. And then kind of having like a date. Is there 2 weeks from now, are we going to be able to? Like, what is kind of like the outlook, a plan, so that we know, so that we can let the client know, so that they have a option, and they know, like, maybe I wouldn't go to this person and I'll wait because I know that it's coming in this place that I know has these rules and regulations. And then I guess just continuing support with landlords and the messaging that this is an ongoing thing. And yes, we're recovering, but if we're at 50% at best, that's at best. We can't do 50% of our services, and we have to do things in such a manner that we have the spacing between. And so we're not at capacity. We can't do the services that we would like to do. And not only that, we're doing that and having bigger time blocks where we're not producing things, you know? And so I guess just having all, and then childcare, having all those things are just kind of issues for me, and I think would be for other people. And as was mentioned by Ian, I think people who may have contractors, you know, what does that look like for them? For us, we have employed our staff, so we are able to do that. But for people who may have chairs, for example, or rooms that they book out, how does that work for them in terms of their recovery plan? Yeah, and then just also lastly, like, you know, just distinguishing between what is a guideline and what is actually something that you have to do. I think there's a lot of gray area there. And so then you still see a spectrum of things that are happening. And so you don't really know if what you're doing is right, if it's too much, if it's wrong, can you be doing less? And how do you make people feel comfortable with all those changes? So I feel like that was a big mouthful, but that's kind of what this week has kind of highlighted for me.
No, that's great, Abba. That's really, really good feedback. So I'm just taking notes on a couple of things that you've raised for sure. Susan, how are you going at the CAT Center? We're interested to know.
Thanks for asking. We were closed. The building itself was closed with the exception of 5 essential services. And as of June 12th, we opened the mall, which was a natural state of existence for us, which it was odd to be closed, but it was natural to be open. So there was that positive working for us. But we opened the doors with reduced hours from 11 till 6, and we'll stick with that for a while because of everything everyone's saying. It's a challenge to get everybody back to work, to get the stores open. Everybody has their unique challenges depending on what their services that they offer. So we've seen not a huge crowd. We've seen steady business. We opened with about 30 stores, and now we have about 60 stores open, and each day a few more open. So, and as that happens, we see a little bit more traffic. Like yesterday, one of our major stores opened, and we weren't run off our feet, which is manageable because what our retailers are expected to do now is exhausting, and you have to be mindful all the time to ensure that you make your customers feel comfortable when they come into our facility, that we care, that we've made efforts to make the building safe. And at 11 to 6 is enough in a day. So that's been interesting. The company that I work for is the landlord of the property. So on the other side of the spectrum, we have been working on this commercial real estate rent relief program. And I have to say it's daunting. It's labor intensive, but it's worth it. And everybody's working together. And just like Ian said, patience and understanding and working together is the forward position on this whole issue. Every one of us are going through this for the first time, and mistakes are being made, but we all understand, and we're trying to work together just to ensure that the end goal is that everybody comes out of this on the right side. But it's going to take a while. That's the long-term goal, is to get us out of this issue. But the short-term goal is to open the building every day and to ensure that that we're offering our customers as safe an environment as we can produce. And yes, it was a short timeline, and I think we've been ready for a while but we had about 14 different plans depending on what the regulations were when we opened. So just adjusting, yes, we're running on our feet. And I think the other thing that's happening is we're a bit fatigued. We're a bit fatigued from the process. And so we just have to look after ourselves and our teams through the process too. I'm sure I'm not speaking for myself on that issue, looking at you, Mayor Patterson.
I think that's a great comment probably for everybody on this call. Just rolling with it and trying to adapt as best you can.
Exactly.
What's your sense on the consumer confidence? So we talked a lot about confidence at our last meeting. What's your sense of what, is it slower than you expected? Is it right about what you expected? Is it even a little better than you expected? Do you have any sense or read on that?
There's still trepidation, absolutely. I don't think we're even close to having that we're back. I think people come in, they're nervous. They don't quite know what's right and what's wrong on what to do. Again, we have many stores, so every store you go into has a different set of rules and regulations. And I think everyone's just trying to do their best to adhere to the regulations. But I think we're just trying to be kind through that process, because I've been yelled at a few times going into different places because I'm not doing things according to the plan. And I'm already nervous going in. So I think I don't believe consumer confidence is back yet. That'll be something we'll have to work on for a long time.
That's great. Thanks, Susan. Anybody else from the group that wants to jump in? I mean, I wanted to hit Ab and Susan particularly because I knew they were most impacted by the stage 2 reopening, but anybody else? Anne or Tricia or Pavna? Neither. Go ahead.
For the arts right now, the churches were able to reopen at 30%, and that's a similar model to the performing arts, but we still haven't heard from the province what's happening there. We're all trying to build maps in terms of 30% capacity, but we don't have any information from the province, which is actually frustrating in the planning cycle. But in talking with the Arts Advisory Committee and Mariah Horner, we're talking about alternative uses of our spaces before we can invite the public in, including the support of new creations. And people are doing really well in terms of digital platforms and talks with their audience. So I find the arts are making a huge effort to connect with their audience, but it's not having that information from the province as to when venues can open and at what capacity. And when venues do open, that is actually going to help the businesses in Kingston because of the economic multiplier effect of what happens when you have a performance. But and it is still having a very serious implication on the employment of artists and arts workers.
Oh, I think that's a great comment. Tricia, your comment from our last meeting is still ringing in my ear about how you guys are a planning sector, how you need that timeline. I will speak for Chris on this, that we don't get nearly the info from the province that we would like to have. So it's something that I'll continue to bring forward, but it's a challenge. It's a challenge for us. I mean, as a municipality, we've been grappling with trying to get city services open because we were surprised even at the amount of stuff that was announced last Friday. So for sure. Pavna.
So with the social services sector, I think, as I said last time, they're taking it very cautiously, but there's a lot of apprehension from staff. A lot of staff are not comfortable coming back. Even if the agency's open, they're not yet ready. They found alternative ways, so they're not quite ready to bring clients in because I don't think they're equipped. Because they're under budget and they've got so many challenges with their revenue, a lot of them don't have enough PPEs or the budget to put up plexiglass or really stay safe. So that's going to be a challenge. However, they've all found alternative means that work for most people. But I would say from what we've heard, about 25% of their clients are not as digitally comfortable. So, there are some clients that we definitely are not being met the way that they need to be. And then we have, of course, the issue with domestic violence where digital is not the best way to connect. It's not a safe way. So certainly our agencies are struggling, but the nice part is that they don't have the same impetus or need to go live right away. So they're taking their time. So we'll learn from the business sector as we go.
Pavna, just a follow-up question on that. I'm thinking that one of the challenges is that the segment of the community that's probably less comfortable digitally may be a segment that is less comfortable maybe moving into in-person, where that's possible? Is there concern there that it's hard to find an alternative?
Yes, so agencies have done well about finding the technology to kind of work with their clients. But what was also challenging is clients who don't have access to that technology or need a safe space. So one of the things that has come up is maybe finding a space where clients can go and access the technology and then dial in to get counseling. So that's an option, because the agencies are not safe. Like, I mean, our spaces are small at the best of times. But we talking to the federal government, because they're looking at options to repurpose federal spaces if we need to. So they've asked us for a list of any spaces we can think of where we can actually start offering services remotely.
That's great. So anybody else that has a comment or input or thoughts on how reopening is going so far? Yeah, Dave.
So yeah, I've had the opportunity over the last several weeks to go into a lot of businesses across Kingston, and I do really think that business owners need to be commended for all the work that they have done in a short period of time. There is a lot of work putting these protections in place that public health has set out. My hope is that the business owners do take this opportunity to engage their employees and work with their employees to not just meet public health's recommendations, but to develop best practices for their individual business. Every business is a bit different. So I'm very hopeful. The feeling I'm getting is that is happening in the majority of businesses across the city. So I just think that the business owners really need to be commended for the work that they have done. That's not to say that there can't be improvements, but I think we're well on our way.
Dave, that's good feedback, and like probably hear more from you too when we get to the employment survey, because we talked about that, and just get your input on that. Michelle.
Thank you. I won't pretend to speak for Tim, but sort of the restaurant sector, accommodation sector, I've been busy, really, really busy. Excited to be open, but a lot of challenges bringing back staff. How many staff? What hours? Is the regulation for tables, 6 feet from table edge to table edge, or is it the distance between chairs, et cetera? So there's sort of struggling with some of the guidelines, but the sun's been shining, so that's good.
It's funny you say that. I'm certainly hoping for a hot, dry summer as well. I think that will play a critical role. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Michelle. And please, yeah, feel free to jump in on behalf of Tim. I'm sure that he won't mind on that. That's great. Okay, so maybe what we'll do now is we'll shift into just a bit of a discussion update on messaging. That was a big thing that the group raised in our last meeting about the importance of messaging and trying to build consumer confidence, but also just to reassure and to help with that customer flow. So I actually asked if Allison would just speak to us a little bit about Tourism Kingston and the messaging work that's been done. And then maybe Lanny, if you want to jump into and just talk about how the city is aligning on its messaging as well. Allison, go ahead.
Sure. So I did prepare a presentation just to walk people through kind of what's in market from a tourism perspective and our plans for the summer. I'll try to do that quickly. I'll just share my screen here if I can. 1 second. Sorry. There we go. Can everyone see that? Okay, great. I'm sorry, previously it was just showing me Zoom over and over. So I'll move through this fairly quickly so we can have a bit of a discussion. But just in terms of where we are Tourism Kingston works on an annual planning process. So of course we did have each quarter mapped out in terms of what our key campaigns and focus would be. Q2 went on hold, of course, when COVID hit, and Q3, in terms of our original plan, remains on hold. I will talk more about Love Kingston and the connection to that, so I won't get into that too quickly. We are seeing a lot of festivals and events, to what Tricia was talking about, move online. So while we put our regular 25 things list sort of on hiatus during COVID-19 when it first hit, we are looking at bringing that back in a refined manner. And of course, as we continue to focus on local, we're still here trying to raise awareness, invest in the right type of media, and continue to stay connected with the Kingston community and beyond, so that, we're top of mind when people are thinking about traveling. To give you a little bit of an overview in terms of what is in market. So we did already have a bike racks campaign that went into market April to November in Ottawa. So this is an out of home campaign, and you can see some of the locations in Ottawa where that exists. I feel like this artwork still works. It's sort of general enough, that we're not advertising anything that isn't accessible in some fashion for Kingston. And as I said, that was already planned and had already been submitted before COVID sort of took hold. In the spring, we were part of Escapism Toronto's spring issue, a partnership with RTO9 and Frontenac. So this was a double page advertorial spread plus a full page ad. And so that is the current issue of Escapism that's out right now. We did do some leisure marketing in some annual publications related to boating and related to bike. I'm sure that most folks have been following along and seeing, bike shortages and those sorts of things, that this cycling seems to be picking up in terms of a trend this year. And so we're happy that we partnered with Ontario by Bike. That is an English and a French publication. Our visitor guide distribution started in January, actually. So 55,000 guides have been distributed in some of those locations you can see there. And we also did launch a culinary website. This had originally a planned digital campaign to go out in the spring, which we did pause. We're looking at potentially a fall launch. This campaign is about farm to table. So the idea of Frontenac farmers providing, local produce to Kingston restaurants and how you can get that experience in this region. We are rolling out some of the stories over the summer as part of our content strategy, but we're looking at tentatively, depending on what the research tells us and what things look like in the fall, to go out with a fall launch for this sort of tied to harvest season. And then coming up, we will have a Canada Day videos. We're working on that right now, where Kingston musicians will be performing at different locations throughout the city, performing the national anthem. And this is kind of building on the Together at Home video that we did when COVID first hit, which we felt like really helped the community feel connected. It had a really positive response. This is another moment, it doesn't have a call to action. It's really about community pride and Canadian pride. And it's a way, hopefully, to leverage that video to reach Canadians beyond Kingston as well. And then getting into July and August, which is where the staycation campaign and messaging comes to play. These are our objectives, not different from what our normal objectives are. It's been challenging to focus on conversion over the last few months, so we are now turning our minds to that a little bit more as reopening is happening and businesses are open a little bit more. Key messaging that we're focused on for the next couple of months. Ultimately, we want to stay top in mind in terms of Visit Kingston, but we want to make sure that we have the right approach so that, we're here to support the local economy, and by supporting each other, we can support the local economy. We want to ensure people understand that Kingston is reopening, and also reinforcing that it's safe to travel locally. Now, moving into the staycation campaign, we have consulted with Kingston Public Health quite a bit about what the appropriate targeting would be for a campaign if we were to go to market. Research through Destination Ontario enforces that Canadians are very focused on supporting local and shopping local. About 80% of Canadians want to buy made in Canada products and support local services. So working with KFL&A, we've identified a Belleville to Brockville focus for this campaign, and we have received support from them to either expand this campaign or a related campaign as far as Ottawa, that would be safe to do so in terms of COVID-19 rates. So this campaign will leverage the existing Love Kingston campaign. And part of the reason we're doing this is that this is a really easy way to communicate that this is another way to support local, to shop local. So this is fundamentally a staycation campaign. The idea of, getting away without necessarily going away, of taking a break within your own region. So here's some mock-ups just to show you what this would look like. Our sales team has been working really hard with accommodation providers and different businesses across the city to build packages that have both a compelling price point, but also are a packaged offer that somebody can sort of just purchase and then experience. Here's some other examples of digital ads. This campaign will be supported by content. I won't go through this too much, but I'm sure most of you are familiar with, blog stories that pop up under the Visit Kingston brand or videos that we share, etc. So we do have a Makers of Kingston campaign out right now that's continuing into July. The staycation campaign will be supported by stories like Be a Tourist in Your Own City this summer, guides to patios, to guided tours, to Canada Day, Father's Day, the August long weekend, focusing on that farm to table culinary scene. And as I mentioned, we're bringing back the 25 things with a focus on both in-person experiences and virtual experiences. And I'll just quickly go over the media and what this will look like for the next 2 months. So you will see that we've engaged with Post Media. It will be a heavily digital campaign, but also with a lot of regional print, and I'll go into that in the next slide. So we're using Post Media in terms of their digital and their local regional print, Facebook, Instagram, Google Display Network, other local print, such as probably Profile Kingston or the Kingston City Guide. We're looking at digital billboards, and then in partnership with Downtown Kingston, we have access to some of their radio buys. And this chart, or this table, just shows you that the focus will really be on promoting staycation packages supported by content as well over the next couple months. And I won't go through all the details here, but this just gives you a sense of what that local media buy. I mean, generally speaking, we don't purchase a lot of local media because normally we're talking to folks who are outside of our city. But we have partnered with Post Media, and we were able to access a matching grant program that they put out where our investment is matched 50-50, so that we're getting quite a lot more. So we're looking at weekly ads running over the next 10 weeks, supported by digital content as well. And this last slide is just about who we're trying to reach. This really is about reaching our local community. There's some, targeting listed here that I won't go into a lot of detail with, but really looking at that Belleville to Brockville, quite a wide range in terms of demographics, and in terms of digital, looking at sort of Kingston as our focal point and a 40-kilometer radius around that. And that's everything. So I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Alison.
You're welcome.
So I just had some feedback from someone from our last meeting, and there's a suggestion, and I'll just put it out. It may not be Tourism Kingston, it may be a broader discussion, but their suggestion is that it may be more effective to look at selling globally, pushing businesses to develop new physical and digital products that can generate new revenue from provincial, national, and global markets. Yes, even arts, restaurants, retailers, and personal services can and must do this. It can be done. They just need encouragement to think bigger and differently.
I think the arts are actually going digital and developing digital products, but the revenue stream is limited in the short term compared to the cost. But I think just to Alison's presentation, that was a great presentation, and the whole staycation aspect is fabulous. I was wondering if Tourism Kingston can include the museums. I know, for instance, the Agnes is opening July 1st and Kingston Museums. So anything that's open, and with the museums and galleries, they can have that dribble-in model where they can limit the number of people in a space, but it would be really great to promote Kingston's museums and heritage and art galleries.
Absolutely. So we have been in touch with CAM, the Kingston Association of Museums, Art Galleries, and Historic Sites, and they're working on providing us with a list of, who is opening and when and how. So what we're imagining for the staycation campaign is ultimately we'll be pushing people to a web landing page that of course will have the packages detailed, but we'll also have a listing of other Kingston experiences that you could add on, other ways that you can experience. So they might not necessarily be part of a package you can buy, but we'll be promoting anything that sort of has that staycation lens that people can do. So absolutely the museums would fit there.
Excellent. Thanks, Tricia. Abba.
Hi, I just got a question, Alison. Is there a reason, I mean, just speaking to kind of the points made earlier by Ian and echoed by other people with respect to the interest of people from bigger cities looking to the future of having Kingston as a possible place of residence. Is there a reason we didn't maybe do Toronto to Ottawa so that this is kind of like you can also visit and get a sense of how Kingston is versus just Brockville to Belleville?
So I would say there's two answers for that. One would be that Toronto's not in stage 2 yet. And so working with Kingston Public Health in terms of identifying, how far west would be safe to invite people to explore our cities was definitely a primary consideration. And then second to that, just looking at the research, the market research really doesn't support that people want to travel right now. So, if I'm just looking at my notes here, Destination Ontario, their most recent research, which was about 3 weeks ago, still so shows that 73% of Canadians are not comfortable taking trips this year. And that has actually worsened from the survey the month before. It was 66% the month before. So kind of combining that public health messaging or recommendations with where we think we'll get the best ROI on our investment tells us that focusing on our region makes the most sense right now.
Thank you. That's a great response. Just wondering what the data was backing it up. So that's great.
No problem.
Great questions, feedback. Anybody else on this? Okay. Thanks very much, Alison. Lanny, is there anything you wanted to add just on a messaging front from the city?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we have been working with Tourism Kingston to obviously align our messaging, whether that's on our website, our signage, buses, to talk about shopping. We used to have this messaging about staying home and staying safe. So we've started to change that messaging across board and looking at shopping and staying safe. So that's what we've been with our messaging.
Is there any other feedback from the group just on the messaging front? So from tourism and city, anything else that we should be thinking about, emphasizing, anything that we are not doing that we should be doing, or anything that we're doing that is an issue?
I wonder, with back to the arts, with museums and art galleries and heritage spaces, if there's some collaborations that can happen that are taking the staycationers to these museums. And we all joke with when we have visitors is when we actually take people to those sites, but to bring people who are already resident into the sites, but having some kind of collaboration, like a museum day, whatever it is, that's getting local people into the museums that are in their neighborhood would be really great. But I think the secret right now is collaboration.
Annie, do you want to jump in on that one?
Yes, and thank you. So it's interesting because I know we have an update coming up on the property tax working group, but part of our conversation in our last meeting started to shift to what are going to be some of the offerings within the city this summer, but also looking at fall and winter. So the conversation started to shift to that because we obviously understand and recognize that, from especially hotel perspective, having people coming into the city is critical for business. So what I suggested was that maybe we needed a different working group that would look at this aspect of the various tourism offering this summer, fall, and looking into winter as well, and see what we could work on collaboratively, and have a working group that could include obviously representation from the arts sector. I think that would be critical, and we could have other organizations such as St. Lawrence Parks Commission come to the table and really try to pull something together.
So if that, does that sound reasonable to the groups? We could, you know, do that sub-working group on the tourism piece and kind of do a deep dive. And maybe we could do, Lanny, what we did with the property tax working group is ask for volunteers from this group first. And then we can build it out from there. So Tricia, if you'd be interested, if there's anybody else that would like to, Sean, thank you. If you want to, Al, that'd be great. So anybody else just to be able to work out some more of those details, that would be great. Great. So just I know that a few of you have mentioned the childcare piece. I will tell you, it has been one of the items at the top of my agenda over the last couple of weeks. We feel that there's still significant work that needs to happen on this front. Lanny, are you okay to just provide a bit of an update on where we're at and where we're going on that?
So yes, absolutely. And so I do have information. I can't say that it's overly positive information, unfortunately. As you all know, the province recently announced that childcare services could reopen. But like many of you, our childcare operators have been struggling to understand what the operations are going to look like, what the requirements are going to be, the ratio of children per childcare worker. So there are a number of things. Funding was of course another issue that was flagged. So we have been reaching out to our childcare centers and with some of our organizations for summer camps, because there is, you know, there is a link there. We understand that in some cases parents may prefer summer camps for children that may be a little bit older. So in terms of numbers, what we were at and what we think may be available starting in the next couple of weeks would be about 2,200 spaces of summer camps to start with. So that will be provided primarily through Boys and Girls Club, and we are working in partnership with them. So we'll be making use of various city facilities to provide that, as well as outdoor spaces. In terms of the actual formal childcare, so we're talking about more of ages 0 to 6. What we're looking at, we think we may be in a position to have about 750 spots starting to open within the next couple of weeks. Now we currently have about 100 of them operating, and those were in place to respond to the need of emergency workers. You'll recall that the province implemented that a couple of months ago. That is obviously much lower than what we typically see in terms of our childcare numbers, but we have a number of operators, one that are not quite sure if they actually want to reopen at this point, considering the requirements, or if they are reopening, they can only function at a much reduced capacity. Like all other sectors, you know, they're looking at give or take 30%, 40% at most capacity. So those are the numbers that we have currently. We are continuing to work with different partners to try to increase the potential spaces available, including summer camps as well. But I may have a different update at our next meeting. I'm hoping I'll have higher numbers at the next meeting, but right now that's what we're looking at starting in the next couple of weeks.
Yes, Chris.
Just to add to Lanny's comments, we have had several meetings with the City of Kingston and Prince Edward and Lennox and Addington folks around childcare reopening, and actually have a meeting tomorrow as well. But I think people are getting really, they're feeling more confident about sort of the core and basic kind of prevention strategies and measures and so on. But there do tend to be, you know, a lot of kind of really specific questions to the different sites and so on. So one of our public health inspectors is kind of taking a lead around childcare, and we've been able to, you know, answer those questions in the hope that that more spaces will be able to open.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So, I mean, it's definitely an issue that we're working on. Is there any other thoughts or feedback or ideas or concerns or anything that you want us to flag for us as we continue to try to sort out the childcare issue? Yeah, Abba, and then Pavna. Abba, go ahead.
I think the only other thing is just to add to the childcare, many people also have like subsidized childcare, and especially if you may be coming in part-time and depending. So I'm just wondering if you can also speak to, or maybe we could address what that may look like in terms of camp applications. So if someone previously would have been able to have a subsidized spot, but that spot is not available to September because they're not reopening, and then therefore they have to then put in their kids into camps, which generally tend to be on a higher range per day than usually a daycare. How would one, or is there anything being looked at in terms of subsidizing that for particular people if their salary may not reach that rate or anything like that?
Lenny?
So thank you. The way that our subsidies for childcare have always worked is that the subsidy actually follows the family rather than the center. So we don't base our subsidies by center. So if you're a parent and you've had a subsidy before and your center for whatever reason is not reopening, but others are, and you're able to get a spot, the subsidy actually follows the family. So you should still be entitled to have that subsidy regardless of which center you're going to.
Thank you. And with camps, Lani, so would that also follow through with camps or only through centers? Like if there aren't enough spaces in the center and therefore they are forced to look at camp options, does that subsidy then follow with those programs as well within the city, if it's a city camp?
With the city camps, we do have a program for subsidy, yes. So it's separate and different from the childcare centers, but we do have a subsidy. It's called a Spark program. So we do have subsidies that are provided for our city services. So we are actually looking at making sure right now that that's being implemented through summer camps. We know some people are going to require those subsidies. So there is an application process, which is pretty simple to fill out, and I can definitely share that with the group.
Thank you.
Excellent. Pavna.
So certainly we're in conversations with the city and Boys and Girls Club about summer camps. My question was, firstly, do we have a sense of the number of spaces, and will it be prioritized to people going back to work, or is it more like a respite and anyone can have access?
So in terms of summer camps, right now we are looking at about 2,200 spaces. In terms of childcare, we are thinking that there may be around 750 spaces. We haven't yet determined how the priority would be set up, but from a childcare perspective, as some of you probably know, we were providing obviously some priority for subsidies, definitely people that are at work or school. So I'm going to have to work with my team and take that back. Pavna, I don't have all of those details. I think it would make sense to look at prioritizing, considering that we do not have sufficient spaces right now for the demand.
Thank you.
Sean.
Thank you. Am I unmuted? Yes, thank you. Great question. And I had exactly the same thought, that we might want to prioritize and look at where the greatest priority is in terms of recovery. The second thought I had, having had someone in my family in childcare, was one of the challenges has always been managing the day, because some kids need to arrive at 7:30 and some kids don't get picked up till 6. And I wondered if thought was into by sector, so that there was some consistency to the approach, that there would be certain childcare or camp options that would be specifically geared to a sector that would help with shift work, would help with pickup times, would help, and frankly, help the center manage the health and safety side of things. It's a very difficult business when you just have random children from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. in some cases. So I just, in follow-up to Bob's point, which was an excellent one, I wondered if that wouldn't be a thought to manage them by sector to really focus the effort. Thank you.
Go ahead.
So the childcare services are being provided by a variety of different organizations and businesses. Some of them are privately operated, some of them are not-for-profit. We can definitely raise that and try to work with them, but I ultimately, I know that they're going to look at what also works or makes sense from their own operations and their businesses. So let me bring that point back. We haven't, I think, gone to those details yet, but let's see what could be possibly arranged to try to meet some of the needs, recognizing, of course, that we may not be able to meet every need that's out there in different sectors.
Great questions and feedback on the childcare piece. Thank you for that. Is there any other thoughts, ideas, questions? Okay, great. Thanks, thanks everybody. So now we're going to, Craig, I'm going to move to you next. There are a couple of pieces that you wanted to bring forward to the group for comment. One of the things we did here in the last meeting was the importance of not only serving businesses, but also serving employees as well. And Dave, you in particular had some great feedback for us on that. So Craig, maybe I'll just give you the floor if you want to just give a couple updates to the group, both on the workforce survey, and then of course, we've also got the economic modeling piece as well. Craig, I can't hear you.
Is that better?
Yeah, much better.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Your Worship. As you've mentioned, this memo follows up on the excellent suggestion put forward by at our last meeting to explore the idea of a workforce survey that would be complementary to the work that we've done on the business survey. Staff had already been actually in process of doing some best practice research on workforce surveys from other jurisdictions, including here in Ontario, but also across North America. And we've got some really good collaborations going. From the research that we've undertaken, there's several themes that seem to be emerging from other surveys. And they include sort of looking at the views on the success of existing programs to support workers and residents, the changing nature of the workplace environment, and that can be the physical changes, working remotely, but also things like health and safety within their work environment. It's looking, there are several questions that are related to the impacts of the financial and sort of emotional mental health impacts of the pandemic, as well as exploring barriers to success moving forward. And that could be everything from access to broadband and the impacts of working remotely to many other features. I guess beyond sort of the direct and immediate impact, there's also the more strategic look at how we explore the impact of the pandemic and how it might drive reskilling of the workforce to respond to more longer-term trends that had been in progress prior to the pandemic, and thinking in terms of digital skills and the growing role that they play in all workplaces, and really I'm trying to understand how the recovery phase that we're entering can be an impetus or a driver, a catalyst to make our community and ultimately our workforce more resilient. I put together a number of questions, probably too many questions, just as sort of a guide. Certainly, there's the potential to whittle that down and to add a few more to tweak our survey. But I have suggested that it may be appropriate to put together a small working group. And I know David raised this at the last meeting, not to put him on the spot, but if there are others that are interested in exploring this survey, certainly I've spoken to Ian at Kingston Economic Development. He's interested in sort of being involved. We'd also want to sort of explore how this is pushed out. Is it done through the city, through their Get Involved Kingston? Is it done, distributively through Kingston Economic Development and other organizations? But again, that's something that the small working group, it would be very task driven. We're not looking at a lot of meetings. We just want to get the questions sort of selected, get the delivery method chosen and put into place, and then push this out as soon as possible. Happy to answer any questions or thoughts anybody might have.
So thanks, Craig. So we sent a draft of the workforce. Any comments, feedback at this point? So to Craig's suggestion of a working group, Dave, would you be interested in participating in that?
Yeah, I'd definitely be interested in participating. I've had a chance to skim over the survey, and the work that's been put into it so far has been really good. Looks excellent. I'm really happy to see that the mental health the mental health aspect of things are being looked at. So yeah, I'd participate in that.
Thank you. It would be great to get a couple of other perspectives as well. So if anyone else is interested and available to be able to help Craig get with that, that would be great. Super. Okay, Craig, you've got the floor on the. So we've talked about the workforce survey. If you wanted to take us through the economic modeling demo as well.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I'll just try and share my screen here. There it is. Do you see my screen? Okay, so this is actually a project. It's actually called a studio model, short-term under capacity dynamic input-output model, or studio for short. The name is hopefully complex, but it's just an opportunity to use data in a model that will hopefully provide leaders and policymakers with a tool to sort of better look at what's happening in the economy, but also to approximate what might actually happen going forward. The collaboration is in partnership with Limestone Analytics, which is a local Kingston firm made up of a number of Queen's professors of economics. Queen's University has been involved, MyTax, which is a federally funded program for research, and the Eastern Ontario Leadership Council, which we're the City of Kingston is actively involved in. It represents municipalities across Eastern Ontario. The use of the data sets that are used are quite extensive and include the census data, labor force survey, Conference Board of Canada. All of this data is updated on a regular basis. Ultimately, it gets the question, and again, I love data, so it's always interesting to me, but why is this important? It certainly provides analysis at a much more granular level. Generally, the data on gross domestic product or output and employment often is focused on the national level. This provides provincial, regional, down to Eastern Ontario, but then down to census division. And as this is a pilot, we've actually are using Frontenac, which includes Kingston and Frontenac County as an example. It's extremely valuable as a city and its partners move forward to seek funding support from other levels of government. Again, much of applications for financial resources are data driven, and they really require that we have the ability to demonstrate the impact or benefit of funding programs. It also allows us to look at different scenarios. So in this case, we've created 4 different scenarios that we're able to work through to explore what that might be. I'm happy to say we seem to be trending towards an optimistic sort of staged recovery. But we've also looked at the potential for less successful future paths. It also shows, as I said, the impact on output And in many cases, that's highly concentrated in wages, because that's a big piece of that. But also employment. And it shows employment by the full-time equivalent. So includes those who are laid off, but also reduced hours that are actually being worked. So just to do a quick little demonstration. Right now, the screen shows the gross domestic product recovery. Each of those lines represents a different sector. In this case, the pink is a wholesale and retail, showing a very extreme impact, but a recovery. Manufacturing, another example. You can click on. Let's see. You can just see the path. What I would say is one of the most valuable pieces to this is perhaps less to do with the numbers, the actual numbers, but more about the shape of the pattern of recovery. So in the case of manufacturing, you see a steep decline and a fairly steep recovery. In terms of the employment levels, again, you're seeing a steep decline and then a recovery as we go into the fall. It changes, as I said, quite significantly based on sort of the focus of the region you're talking about. That's for the province of Ontario. It changes as you move down into Eastern Ontario, which excludes Ottawa, but includes everything to the Quebec border, up to Renfrew over to excludes Oshawa. And again, it shows slightly different. It's showing construction and retail as being extremely heavy hit in terms of the scenario. It also shows sort of the impact on employment. In this case, Eastern Ontario is heavily focused on accommodation and food services, and sort of shows you that the size of the impacts of that shock. As we sort of move down into Frontenac, again, you see the significant role that accommodations, food services, and the tourism sector face, the impact on retail. Again, it demonstrates some very powerful information to put towards reporting to upper levels of government and building a case for need. It does allow you to sort of move forward in terms of the time frame right up to the current and explore sort of where we might envision things moving forward. As I said, it does have different scenarios, including reduced household spending and how that might impact different sectors of the economy. In this case, has a big impact on insurance and real estate rentals and leases. But again, it does allow us to sort of play around with this, and it's quite dynamic. Again, it's I don't want to spend too much time on this. It is there's certainly an academic component to this, but certainly if you have any questions, I'm happy to respond.
Where does the arts and culture industry factor in? I was trying to look at your legend and I couldn't find it, because arts and cultural industries nationally is a $54 billion industry and a very big employer in Canada. It's about 3% of the GDP.
So,
oh, there you are.
Here's the impact. This is just on Frontenac. We look at the impact from February through to the end of the year. You're looking at almost $1 billion impact on GDP in our area, and a loss of almost 7,000 full-time equivalent jobs, and a return to full employment that looks like, sort of in the late fall into December.
I would say that would be highly unlikely if venues aren't opened.
Exactly. So if you start to play around, so if that's an optimistic. If you start to play around with persistent shocks, and again, they haven't built into epidemiological models into this, but you can see how it changes quite rapidly with recurrent shocks. If tourism fails to recover at the pace that we hope, it gets even worse. Again, the further out you look, the less accurate it is. But as we get more data every month, it feeds into the system and adapts.
Thank you.
So Craig, I think you might have just answered my question. So this is updated with monthly data. So, and then that allows us to then get some sort of projection out. Is it 3 months? 3 months projection?
It's out. It's out 6 months projection.
Oh, at 6 months.
Out into the future. Yeah.
Okay.
It's January right now.
Okay. I mean, I think that would be. I think this is a useful tool even to have as we continue on, and even just getting that data and projections. I think will help us as we work on potential and trying to identify potential solutions and different tools and policies we want to look at. That would be very useful for us. Is there any other input, questions, suggestions, ideas from the group about this modeling? So I can't see everybody on my screen at the moment, so just feel free to jump in if I'm not seeing you.
Brian, is this Craig? Is this open to anyone? Like, can we go in and play with the modeling?
It is about to become open. I can certainly share this with members of the working group of the recovery team if you're interested.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Thank you.
One of the other ones were just the sort of the second. This is still in the works, so bear with me. But looking at sort of the cumulative impact on GDP per household, and trying to understand, because of the different types of economies each community has, we actually have some data with respect to other communities here in Eastern Ontario. Some hit harder than others. Frontenac there. The black is due to the change of hours worked, so you can see how series of an impact that has, and the sort of the reddish burgundy is the layoffs that have taken place. Again, quite a significant impact in terms of the actual cumulative impact per household. So you can see in terms of Frontenac right now, it's a total change in GDP of almost $13,000, which is a very significant hit.
Anybody else with any comments or questions on this? Craig, I would agree. I think that this is a really useful tool, and if we can circulate that to the group and just even have just some updates, maybe semi-regular updates for the group, just so that we understand where we are and where we might expect that we're going, I think that would be useful.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Craig. Okay, if there's no other comments or questions on that, Lanny. Oh, I'm sorry, Pavna, go ahead.
I just wanted to, so Craig, thanks for sharing that. I think this is really critical to the work ahead. I think if we can get some time to analyze it, it would be great if we could then look at certain industries that are most impacted or decide to go with the ones least impacted. But I think as a group, this would really help us focus and prioritize next steps.
I think that's a great comment. One of the things I didn't mention was that we are looking, we have actually started to use this information and shape some business support programs and applications that we've made to other levels of government that we hope to launch very, very soon. And certainly having that information was a data-driven story to tell. Made a huge difference in hopefully securing those resources.
Bob, I think that's absolutely a great comment. I think we can definitely use this as a tool for us to prioritize some of our work and focus ahead, for sure. Christian.
Hi. What's really interesting in this recovery map is sometimes when I've had some conversations in the arts sector, people say, well, what happens if we had a drive-in? That would solve everything, or not solve everything, but all these short-term aspects. But what we need to do is actually build recovery on a rock solid foundation rather than sand. And I think the city's advocacy in getting support in for the nonprofit sector and the cultural sector during this period is really, really important. Rather than doing one-off events, we actually have to invest in the long-term recovery. And the attraction of investment into Kingston is going to be really important in terms of intergovernment affairs.
Absolutely. Tricia, that's a great comment. I could not agree more with that. Absolutely. Okay. Just looking at our agenda, Lanny, I'm going to go to you next. I know that you've been doing some work on the property tax working group. If you could just provide an update for us, that would be great.
Sure. So thank you. Actually, a few people on this call are members of this working group, and we had also participation from others in the community to join the working group. So we've met twice now, and we had a chance to talk through and come up with what we think would be a good approach from a property tax perspective and what we could focus on. So yesterday I sent to the group, it was yesterday evening, I believe, I sent to the group essentially highlights of what is being proposed. The working group is supportive of this particular approach, and should the group today, the recovery team, be supportive, we would like to present this to council on June 23rd to get council support. So essentially what is being proposed is that all property taxes that were due in June, so the second payment of property taxes due in June, be deferred to the end of August. So that includes all residential, multi-residential, all businesses as a starting point. But what we would like to add to that, because what we heard in the working group is that there are certain sectors that have been hit pretty hard, and they're just starting now to either reopen or see a little bit more activity or business. And that's primarily in the commercial sector for smaller businesses, as well as hotels and motels. So in the document that was sent, we are also adding the possibility for businesses, commercial businesses, that have a value of $2 million or less, and hotels and motels, to be able to apply for further deferral until the end of November for their second payment, property tax payment. So the couple of things that we're obviously looking at in terms of requirements, those businesses have to be in a position where they're struggling financially because due to COVID-19. And there's also a proposed timeline for application, as well as property owners that have tenants. They must be passing this deferral on to their tenants. So what we also heard in the working group is that there are some concerns where property owners may be getting the deferrals, but the tenant may not always be benefiting from that. So we want to make sure that that's incorporated with the additional deferral that could be considered till the end of November. With that, I will say that there was a lot of research that was done. The city staff reached out to other municipalities, and I know that representatives from the hotel associations also reached out to their colleagues, and it seems that we are either in line with what others are doing or a little bit ahead of what others might be doing in terms of the proposed end of November deferral. So I think at a high level, that's what we want to highlight for today. I know, Sean, you're on the call and you've been quite active as well. Not sure if you want to add anything to that.
Thank you, Lanny. Just a point of thanks then from the accommodation sector. We really appreciate the thoughtfulness of the conversations we've had with Lanny and Desiree and the team, and we do appreciate this. And just to spotlight, we are trying to work with other hotel associations and understand what their push is and work with our, there is no provincial hotel association, but we are working with the Hotel Association of Canada and other like groups like TIO and the Resorts of Ontario to try and push forward an agenda on whether it be granting programs or frankly long-term relief that doesn't harm the position of the city and the municipalities, but rather gives us an opportunity to recover. Yeah, I'd be interested, you know, Craig's model was really interesting to me. I'd really love to understand the assumptions around tourism and hospitality, because as I've said publicly before, we believe we're 24 to 36 months away from being at pre-COVID levels. And, you know, so I do appreciate, Lanny, the consideration for our specific sector, and we'll be very supportive of working with you on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. That's great. Good feedback. So I know some of you have been working on the property tax piece. Is there any other questions or feedback, ideas? Okay, great. Thanks, Lanny and Sean, for that. So I'm watchful of our time. You know, I find that generally, like, you know, around an hour and a half or a bit is probably about the ideal time frame. I know everybody's extremely busy. So for this last piece, I would actually like to come to the group and ask for your feedback on how things are going so far. This is our third meeting, and what I would share from my perspective is I felt that up until now, certainly we're basically in the rapid response phase, where we're basically just trying to quickly address issues and try to address challenges as quickly as we can. Certainly, I think the feedback we've been getting in this group has been very beneficial for myself and for staff to be able to make sure we're focusing on the right things, and then we're providing feedback back to you. But it's really important to me that if this is a steering committee, I want you guys to do the steering. So I guess my question to you is what, as I look, for example, to build out agendas for our next meeting, the next couple of meetings, how would you like to approach that? Do you, is it easier for you guys right now to just come to me and say, can we put this on the agenda for our next meeting? I'm happy to do that. Do we want to at some point have a facilitated session? I mean, I think we are going to start to transition to some longer term strategic thinking, which I think we've already seen some highlights of that coming out of the discussion today. So I'm interested both in input and in process, making sure that you guys are the ones kind of driving this and not me. I'm trying to help guide and make sure that we're efficient and effective with our time, but I'd really like to hear from you folks about how you would like me to kind of guide as we move, say, to our meetings. You know, our next one's the beginning of July. How should we approve that? Tricia.
I think this is an absolutely fantastic process. And you're doing a great job at chairing meetings and listening to people, and it's a very engaged group. I like the idea of being able to feed in topics such as employment, just focusing on employment, and as we go forward, that more long-term thinking of how to create continuous employment for people going forward. I think that strategic approach going forward is really important. And as you said, we have to do the rapid response, but that we start to get into more building block steps going forward. But it is a really great process, and so thank you.
Sean.
Thank you, Brian. Just a couple of comments. I think you're exactly right that in the rapid response phase, where we're trying to clarify and understand and you're taking our feedback around communication and harmonization, I think is totally appropriate. I'll just say every disruption like this creates opportunity as well. And some of the opportunities I think that we're spotlighting is the collaboration between sectors. I think a strengthened and enhanced partnership with the city and some of our associations is evident, and that's all very, very positive. I would love us, though, to reserve some time down the road to talk about, you know, how do we maintain some of the learning we've had from here? How do we address, how do we COVID-proof ourselves for the future? Specifically, the example that we've talked about, the accommodation table, is we have a single source of funding called the MAT. And what we're seeing is the municipal accommodation tax, how fragile it is in a situation like this. And we're committed to that for the long term, and that will recover. We know that over time. But is there other ways for us to increase non-resident tax? Are there other opportunities for us to build process now while we're collaborating and at the table with the other sectors and look for opportunities to grow that base for the municipality? So it'd be those kinds of conversations. I think Trish's suggestion is brilliant. We have to have an employment conversation, and we have to think about how the social contract we have with our employees is forever changed. And Dave, you've had some great thoughts about that. How is that forever changed, and how does that become part of why Kingston is a better place to live and work and stay in and come to than other places? So again, I'm really interested in protecting our long term and making sure that we seize on opportunity. Thank you.
Excellent feedback, Sean. Anybody else? Susan.
Hi. With respect to your comment about the process of this particular committee, I think that all of us have just had our worlds change as of last Friday, and it's really early days. The transition of forward thinking from day-to-day thinking, we're just in the process of that right now. And maybe a meeting of I like the structure of the meetings, but then introducing more input from the group on the agenda would be most welcomed, but it's coming. I think we've all just been a bit shocked by the movement. It's a hurry up and wait situation, and now we're there for the most part, not everybody, but for the most part. So I think that part of it would be my suggestion of transitioning through a day-to-day operation to a forward-thinking operation. I mean, we're always thinking forward, always, but we need to catch our breath and then move forward a little bit more and think long-term would be my thoughts.
Absolutely. Thanks, Susan. Pavna.
So I agree with everything. I like the concept of looking ahead. I like the concept of more input from everyone around the table. I'd also like us to prioritize, because we can't do everything. And I think maybe a session where we can actually agree on what's going to have the most impact. And it might not be perfect and we can course correct, but we're really helpful to focus in and really do something. Also to articulate our goals, like what is this group trying to achieve? How will we know we've been successful at the end of the day would be really helpful, because then we can work towards that.
Great feedback. Great suggestion, Pavna. Anybody else have a comment or input for me on this? So here would be my proposal to the group. Again, because things are changing so quickly, and I think that there's still some short-term rapid response that we're still dealing with. What if I go with a fairly similar model for our next meeting? So I will put an agenda together, but I'm going to ask for each of you, if there's issues or discussions, pieces that you want to put forward for discussion. How do I put this? Probably, if we want to spend like 15, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, on a topic, that's perfect. So if you can kind of give me your suggestions about what it is that you're seeing that you want us to be able to address, that would be great. I will also go to staff, as I've done the last couple meetings, and ask for items and issues that they would like to bring to the group as well. And then what I would propose is that somewhere in July, so maybe by our meeting in mid-July, for example, late July, that perhaps we could do more of a facilitated session where we could start to kind of put out some of those longer term strategic things that I think everyone's starting to kind of think through as we get out of the short term crunch, so that we can start to manage that transition from the rapid response to more of the longer term strategic thinking. So if we were to take that model, so our next meeting, you guys feel free to just bring to me agenda items and I'll build them in. And then I'll work on a facilitated session a little bit maybe later in July. Does that sound like a reasonable course of action for everybody? Is that okay? Okay. So why don't we go ahead with that then? And like I said, I would certainly welcome any thoughts or input. The other thing is if you want to have a discussion with me just one-on-one and kind of get a sense if you think you'd like to have a discussion but want to talk to me about it first, then please don't hesitate to reach out. Always happy to do that as well. Okay, so with that, it is 10:31. So maybe we will call it a morning at that. Thanks everybody. Again, great input, great discussion. Really appreciate your time, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys in a couple of weeks. Thanks and have a great day.
Thank you all. Thanks.